All right, welcome to Homecoming, October 8th, 2022. Actually, the 120th year of athletics at Gustavus, but I guess we're not celebrating this year. We are also going to talk about the 50-year anniversary of Title IX. And from my perspective as a coach and a full-time faculty member, my perspective will deal with the four sports that I actually coached during that time. It's of interest that I recently got a card from one of our alumni who graduated in 1950, and she had come over to see my yard because I have an interesting yard. And so she wrote me a thank you note. And she said, "And you know, Gretchen, I was a member of the aquatic league, the divers, in 1950. So there were opportunities, sort of sketchy and in between for athletics. Dorothy Lutz here was a member of some kind of swimming group before we had what we would call, as Dorothy says in her note. And this, of course, you know, was before real athletics for women started at Gustavus. So I'm here to tell you that real athletics for Gustavus women, I believe, started in 1968 when I was hired by Nancy Baker and Lloyd Hollingsworth with the full intention that we were going to open up our facility and our just our campus to those who were interested in athletics beyond just the recreational basis. Nancy, of course, was there before and she had already started coaching and teaching gymnastics and just as a legend in coaching gymnastics and doing wonderful things for our program in physical education as well as her gymnastics coaching. And she was certainly a mentor and a friend to me for all her life. And so I'm going to start then with knowing that if I was going to be hired at Gustavus in 1968, that I would not only be a full-time faculty member, but I would be deeply involved in the athletic department. And as it turns out, it got me teaching full-time and coaching every season, including fall, winter, and spring. So we started with volleyball, and I can't really say we had a season because I had just come in. I didn't have any concept of how to get a schedule going for whatever team that I didn't even know I had because I hadn't met the players or any of the people who might be interested at that time. So we got invitations from different schools in the fall saying, "Come to our school, we're having a volleyball tournament. Will you bring a team?" And so I put this on the locker room door and had people sign up if they wanted to go to the volleyball tournament at a specific school. And lo and behold, they signed up, and so we went. Playing a very simple center front strategy where the center front person would set the ball to the two outside hitters and the rest would try to get it to the center, and just playing the best we could without any practice and without really understanding all the skills and the offenses and defensive that we might be able to use. But they loved it, and of course they wanted to do more, and so the following year in 1969 we had a volleyball schedule and we practiced. And that made a big difference. Our main venue for playing volleyball in the early days was Alumni Hall. There were two gyms up there with a dividing door and a men's locker room on one side and a women's locker room on the other side, and then the pool was also in that facility. And you say, well, how come that facility was so well outfitted? Well, in those early days, swimming was a requirement. So we had to have locker rooms for men and women in the swimming facility in order for them to change clothes and to fulfill the requirement to graduate having fulfilled the swimming requirement. Okay, that was sort of Alumni Hall and volleyball. Not a very good facility, but we actually played matches there and had other teams come to play us, which was good because we had a locker room. That was a plus. Myra Memorial Fieldhouse had a much better floor for us to play on, However, there were only men's locker rooms in Myron Memorial Fieldhouse, so that created a problem for visiting teams. And for our own team, where do we dress? They would dress at their dorm rooms and come over. Otherwise, we had 2 small bathrooms, one for men and one for women, outside the men's locker rooms. And that's really not a good situation for a visiting team or even for our own team. And besides that, if there was any kind of athletic training situation that we needed, there was a small athletic training room in the middle of the men's locker room in Myron Memorial Fieldhouse. So we could start to see there were some inequalities that were quite noticeable in our facility arrangements. You realize that, the Title IX law said that, people should not be excluded from participation. They should not lack the opportunity to play. They should not be denied benefits and services within the programs, and they should not be subject to discrimination. So already we can start to see that we had some things to take care of in order to equalize programs and to give our students the opportunities to give them participation on some kind of an equal basis, and not to deny benefits and services, and to not discriminate. And, just because you have the law doesn't mean things change the next day. Building a new facility like Lund Center, instead of having Alumni Hall and Myron Memorial Fieldhouse as our major indoor spaces, 1972, and then 1984, Lund Center was built. And that gave men and women and recreators more opportunities. I mean, the Title IX law affected our entire student body, not just women. Well, so we went from Alumni Hall to Myron Memorial Fieldhouse, and the Fieldhouse was a place that basketball could play from day one. And now we were further into the fall season, so the school had given us an extra $500 in our budget, at which time we were able to buy uniforms for the basketball team. And otherwise, if we didn't have uniforms, the girls would travel, the women would travel, and they might have to wear pennies in order to identify that they were all on the same team. But the first uniforms, as you see here, were purchased with that original $500, and lo and behold, the girls were so proud, and eventually we got a jacket, a warm-up jacket too. But then this uniform was worn by the basketball team. We practiced in Alumni Hall, which was a short court for basketball, but we played our games in Myron Memorial Fieldhouse, which was a full-size basketball court. However, women had not yet established the 5-player game. When I first started coaching, we were half court, 3 guards and 3 forwards, and they only could play on their one half of the court. So we had permanent guards, permanent forwards, sort of like the old Iowa basketball. Eventually we added a rover. We had a roving guard that could play the whole court and a roving forward. So then we could play 4-on-4 on one side of the court. And then lo and behold, the coaches for basketball got together and said, well, maybe we should play 5-on-5, but can the women handle playing on a full court? And so we talked about it, and then we voted, and of course the women could handle playing 5-on-5. I've been playing 5-on-5 since I was in 5th grade. But coaching for women at that time was different. I had to adjust my strategies for offense and defense for 3 different kinds of basketball. For volleyball, I had never played power volleyball. I played recreational volleyball. And the advancement of volleyball offense, defense, and skill development put me in workshops and at camps all my life in volleyball as I continued to coach volleyball for most of my career. There was a lot for me to learn in order to teach it to the players, and the players are not coming in at that time with a lot of skill. Being a good teacher like I was really helped me with my coaching. Okay, so basketball, we had our season in January. We played during J-term. So we played 9 or 10 games all in J-term. And that was our season. The next sport that we went into was softball. And there we had some issues with the facility because we had a grass field with a backstop and benches to sit on and thin orange rubber bases that we threw on the ground at the proper distances to play our games. Eventually we got the bigger, fatter bases that were made out of canvas. And I can't remember if they were actually attached to the ground or not, but we're still playing on a grass field. They hadn't skinned the field for us yet. In fact, one field where we played was next to the president's house, and there was a very close to the Arboretum as we know it today, and there was a pine tree in center field. So it was interesting that we told our opponents when they came, to be careful when you're in center field and you don't run into the tree while you're trying to catch a ball. And of course, I told my players to hit the ball to center field. So softball finally got a skinned field, and we never got, the dugout and a stand behind us to broadcast our games and things like that. So we had facility problems, which were fairly glaring. As we think about Title IX and what kinds of things we can compare, locker rooms, facilities to play in, awards, athletic training, equipment, uniforms, housing if we travel, transportation if we travel, schedule, state versus MIAC. Men had been in the MIAC since 1920. Gustavus women joined the MIAC in 1981-82. So when we played volleyball and basketball and softball, we played everybody in the state. We didn't have an MIAC schedule. We didn't know if we won the MIAC championships or if we were MIAC award winners individually because of our stats, etc. And that was true until we became part of the MIAC for women, and then we had our conferences. But we just loved playing, and we didn't care if we played Mankato or St. Cloud or the University of Minnesota in volleyball, basketball, softball, and tennis. That's just what we did, because before MIAC, I set up the schedule and I played whoever was available to play. And there wasn't actually that much difference between us and some of what we called the bigger schools at the time. So basketball and softball were, facility-wise and locker room-wise, were lacking. Tennis, we had 3 courts on the south end of campus, and we had 5 courts on the north end of campus, all outdoors. Sometimes we had a very limited schedule because if the weather was bad, we didn't play. We had no indoor facility. Steve Wilkinson, bless his soul, he tried to set up nets inside of Alumni Hall and inside of my room, but playing tennis on a hardwood floor is really difficult. When we finally developed the Lund Center Ice Arena, we were able to buy carpeting to put in Lund Center, so that allowed us to play tennis on 4 courts inside of the ice arena, which was cement underneath the ice, which wasn't a real good surface for us to play on. But the carpet eventually in the early 80s did give us an indoor facility for tennis. And then of course Steve and his players that graduated and just benefactors built up the tennis program to the Wilkinson Tennis Center that we have now. So, as we look back, we're looking at Title IX, not to allow for participation, to give opportunities, to not deny benefits and services, and not to be discriminated against. Well, if the athletic training room is in the middle of the men's locker room in my room, we were discriminated against because we couldn't use the athletic training room until it was late at night. So there was an annex next to the Myra Memorial Fieldhouse. And in 1972, when Title IX first came out, the big win that we got is we hired Gary Reinholz as an athletic trainer We set him up in the annex where he could be accessed by both men and women. And we also converted part of the annex to locker rooms and showers for women. And I actually had an office over there, and Nancy Baker had additional spaces for practicing gymnastics. So Gustavus, I have to say, they saw what needed to be done, but you, like I said, you pass a law and then the next day, not everything's equal. We passed the law in 72, Lund Center was built in 84 for us to use. So it took 12 years to figure out that facility problem and fix it. But we did little things that made a big difference. Our players were, you know, they just loved playing. The early players, once again, our transportation was either a van, a 15-passenger van, or the two limousines that we had. We had a Chrysler limousine with 4 doors on each side, and we had a Gusmobile, looked like a big taxi cab, also having 4 doors on each side. And so I drove the van or the limousines when I took the players to their events. And later on we got buses for everybody, but that was a long time after this initial transportation situation. The only men's teams that had buses were the really big teams like football and teams that actually needed that. And other men's teams that were sort of big, they maybe had 2 vans. But this limited the size of my squads. You know, people say, how come, you know, we got so few people on the team? Well, the 15-passenger van, Gretchen, Koehler, coach, driving, 14 players in the van with our equipment, our balls and our towels, and our sack lunches. So, you know, that's what a lot of our older players remember, and I think they remember it lovingly and with a lot of nostalgia. And to this day, we have a lot of fun talking about the hardships that we had, and really didn't think they were that hard because we were able to play. I was able to buy decent equipment. And some of the rulings helped men's teams too. I remember the men's soccer team had plastic balls for practice, but they played with a leather ball for the game. And that's not right. I mean, the football team didn't have plastic balls for practice and then a leather ball when they played the real game. And the volleyball team, we bought the finest volleyballs I could buy, Tachikaris. And so we helped some of the men's teams get rid of some inequalities even between them with Title IX. And Title IX also spread across the educational situation at Gustavus. If there's an advanced chemistry class that only allows men in it, you know, that's discriminatory. And so there were other things that are part of Title IX besides athletics. Well, I want to, just for fun, I talked about the early schedule. Here's an early volleyball schedule for volleyball. Starting in October, we played Carleton, then we played the U of M, then we played Dr. Martin Luther, then we played St. Olaf, then we played Mankato, then we played Dr. Martin Luther in Alumni Hall, then we played St. Cloud, and then we went to Southwest State, which we played in Alumni Hall, and then we went to the state tournament that was at the University of Minnesota. We played everybody in the state. The 1975 team that was 23-2 or whatever they were, that was playing everybody in the state. And that team was the first team for women to go to the national tournament. We ended up being second place at the regionals and were chosen at large to go to the national tournament in Pocatello, Idaho, where we spent weeks before we left to go to that tournament raising money so we could fly. And then I also found a church next to the school where we could sleep on the floor in our sleeping bags and play in the 3-day national tournament, which put us in the top 16 schools in the nation. We didn't play that well and we didn't, you know, come out winners, but from 69 to 75 with players who didn't know what topspin was, that group are the real pioneers in our sports. People like Connie Milankovich and Roxy Swenson and Tanya Mao, who played 3 sports for all 4 years, have no stats, but we have wins and losses. these people are in the Hall of Fame, and they are the true pioneers of women's sports. They are the real athletes. For interest here, then, we have the basketball team played January 8th through January 29th. Remember, we only played during January term. We played River Falls, St. Olaf. We played River Falls again. We played St. Olaf. We played the U of M. We played Mankato. We played Winona. We played Augsburg. We played St. Olaf, and we played Carleton. And I set up the schedule. We could play anybody in the state because we didn't have a conference. And not having a conference hurt us because of, later on, induction into Hall of Fame. They want to know how many conference titles you won, how many of your players were all conference, what were their stats. Well, I'm sorry, we traveled in a 15-passenger van. I drove and I had 14 players. I didn't have a statistician. I didn't have an athletic trainer. I didn't have a manager. I coached the A squad and the B squad, junior varsity, varsity. So there were things at the beginning that sort of hurt us a little bit toward later on when we're trying to honor these old-time athletes and we don't have certain numbers for them. But these kids, I tell you, they're pretty marvelous when it comes to loving what they did and returning to campus to have some fun with the new kids. This is the 75 team in the uniforms here. Notice those are the same uniforms that we bought in 1969. They're still wearing them. And they organized the 40-year reunion for this team in the colored picture. And you can see that two of the players are still wearing their uniforms that they wore 40 years prior at the national tournament. We were so proud to be there, even though we had to raise our own money to get there. And we slept on church floors and made our own food in the church kitchen and walked across the street to play in the Pocatello gym. It was a great big field house. And flying in the plane from Salt Lake City to Pocatello with Long Beach State, one of the teams that would be there at the competition. That was pretty interesting. They were very tall, and we were not tall, but we were good. All right, well, I'm going to try to put this in perspective now and close this up. Thank you for watching and being interested, and I'm certainly available to talk to anybody about these old-time sports because, tennis, we played matches, and when we traveled, we slept in homes, people's homes. When we played the tennis tournament at Carleton, we stayed with the Carleton tennis players in the dorms. Facility-wise and housing-wise, when we traveled, were not always equal, that we were able to line up motels for us to stay in, that we were able to have hot food after we played. We ate a lot of sack lunches and those kinds of things. Title IX really gave us some clout to ask for things that really were just part of improving the overall competition for men and women at Gustavus. And so, if you look at our facilities today, it sort of knocks your socks off, but there might still be some incidences where there are violations of Title IX, but they need to be pointed out and we need to correct them if that is true. If I have to single out something that was sort of fun for this particular presentation is we had the 100-year anniversary of Gustavus Athletics. 1902, the men's football team played a team from Mankato. In 1903, the women's basketball team played a team from Mankato. And so we've already celebrated 100 years of Gustavus Athletics. And I want you to look at that picture of the Gustavus women's basketball team from 1903. It's in the pool area on the second floor where they have decorated that whole display case and all the walls with the history of Gustavus Athletics for 100 years. that picture of those women basketball players, they are wearing their uniforms in that picture. Their hair is all done up, and they probably were wearing a high heel type shoes that laced up to their knees. And then, you wonder why it took so long for women to be, really recognized for the skills that they could have if they were given opportunities and participation and correct coaching, proper coaching, how well they could do. The biggest benefit that I see from Title IX, when it actually happened, 1972, we hired Gary Reinholz. And after that, little things at a time, uniforms, added shower room, until now we have Lund Center, and now the Wellness Center, which is, top notch, and the Wilkinson Tennis Center, and the new football field, the new baseball diamond, the new softball field. I mean, people who come to see our campus today are going to be amazed with our facility, and players are going to be amazed with our facility. But you have to remember where we came from, the real pioneers, the Connie Milenkoviches, the Roxy Swensons, the Tanya Maus, the Elaine Spangler, Boston Johnson from Massachusetts. These people had no stats, they played, we did well, and they are in the Hall of Fame. And these are the real pioneers of our athletic, of the athletics that Dorothy called the real women's sports programs.